Hello everyone, good day, and I'm happy once again to see you in this video today. Today I want to be discussing about a particular topic that is very important, very central to my heart, and I take this very seriously. Against the background of my many years of teaching development, of researching development, of experiencing development, of intentionally engaging development across boundaries of the world. So today I'll be talking about why poor countries remain poor and underdeveloped. And this is very important because there have been so many narratives of why poor countries remain developed, especially in the last decade or even more. It's been obvious that many countries of the world, particularly poor ones, have not really been able to exit the underdevelopment trap. So it's against this background that it's very important to look at this issue very importantly, because since China and the Asian tigers, generally speaking, showed prospect of progress and development, especially China, more poor countries have not been able to replicate the same. Even if you look at India, if you look at Brazil, if you even a number of other countries across the world have not been able to take giant leap out of underdevelopment, and it's actually even very worse in Africa and even many other parts of Asia. So then why have we not been able to replicate the China or the Chinese experience, and why have we not been able to have significant leap out of poverty and underdevelopment? And more countries actually have been worse in terms of development experience. So why is this so, and why has it been so difficult for more countries to exit the underdevelopment trap or poverty trap? This is what I want to be talking about in this video. And there have been so many theories over the time. There have been the modernization theory, dependency theory, world system theory, globalization theory, and a lot of narratives. So I just think it's very important for us to look at it more practically, how we can explain current underdevelopment debacle or poverty challenge or quagmire of poor countries, in contemporary times. There have been so many analyses around these. People have given the analysis of colonialism, that many of these poor countries is because of their colonial experiences. Many have also given analysis of how the West or developed countries continue to be exploitative of these poor countries. There have been so many trending videos on account of continuous stranglehold of Western nations. Now China not enabling these poor countries to exit the poverty or underdevelopment situations that they find themselves. And there have been so many of these dependency issues saying it's because of the West. And now the videos that will trend, especially in these poor countries, the videos are those ones blaming external forces or blaming the West. I've seen many of these, and that's why I decided to just take this video very seriously to engage this narrative. There have been so many economic theories, particularly there have been the issue of absence of enabling business environment, accounting for why poor countries remain poor. And there has been also the issue of a low level of education. There have been so many analyses around that poor countries don't have enough level of education to jumpstart growth and development. And there are also the issue of political instability or social instability in economic analysis. So, but generally speaking, I believe these are very true. Or if you blame colonialism, if you blame imperialism, globalization, the Western influence, or you talk about these economic causes, not that they are not true, but they are not sufficient factors, the way I see it. And the more, or the earlier we began to look at this issue in a pragmatic way, rather than being very theoretical and blaming the West, and blaming colonialism, or blaming imperialism, or blaming some other external issues or historical issues. The earlier we start thinking about this and looking at it creatively, the better. If you look at it. So for me, I believe that these external factors might be important, but they are not sufficient factors in explaining underdevelopment experience of poor nations. So, and that's why I've read many books also, many books that I've read trying to explain underdevelopment of poor countries. Many of them, I can't begin to mention them. So I've taken my time to research all of this, also based on my experience. Number one reason I will give from my own experience and research and travels and even engagement over time is the fact that many poor countries still think development will just happen. that development will be an event that they can just continue to do what they're doing and they're going to have, suddenly they will just become developed. It's not true. There is a need to be deliberate, to realize the need to develop their people and to begin to take concise steps towards this. And this has to do with both the rulers and even the followers. It's not, development will not just be an event. It's a process. So poor countries need to realize, and leadership, the leaders have to show direction, and the followers should be ready to follow. So there's a need for poor nations to realize that they need to take deliberate effort, deliberate steps, and make deliberate attempts to be able to achieve development. Until this deliberate effort or realization, is galvanized, development will not just happen suddenly. This is a major reason. Number one is widespread corruption. I did a video on corruption and society. In fact, corruption in many poor countries today has moved from just being corruption to impunity. People steal public funds, and people enrich themselves to the extent that they become richer than their countries or their states over time. And these corrupt tendencies do not only short-circuit the resources that are made for everybody and given to individuals. These corrupt tendencies compromise the system generally. And this is noteworthy. So corruption. Now, impunity, grand corruption, and corruption at the micro level. This kind of corruption is a major problem to Africans. And there seems to be no systems in place, or political will, or even social will to hold corrupt leaders accountable in poor countries, to the extent that these poor leaders become celebrities in the long run. So how do you steal the whole resources meant to drive the country in the desired direction, and individuals take these resources for themselves? So how will you have development in such instance? You also have the issue of favoritism and nepotism. Poor countries don't have meritocratic systems in place. People operate on cronyism, and cronyism will never allow development to happen. There's a need for meritocracy. Meritocratic systems are needed. There is what I call circular exploitation, or what has also been called mutual impoverishment, where everybody in poor countries takes advantage of the other person, thinking that he or she is enriching himself or herself, not knowing that in the long run, the system will be compromised. So everyone is exploiting everyone, rather than everyone taking steps or doing things that will be able to sustain development process. So everyone is taking steps and doing things that will in the long run compromise the system of development. Therefore, in the long run, everybody becomes impoverished. And this is very important. So there's also the issue of entitlement mentality. Poor countries don't sufficiently consider what they need to do to assist their countries. Like the Americans will say, God bless America, or don't think about what America can do for you, but what we can do for America. Poor countries don't want to think in this direction. In fact, if you make such statements, or you advise in that direction, people will nearly mob you and say, what can I do for this nasty country? But in the long run, your action and inaction, my action and inaction, ultimately will determine the direction of our growth and progress. So it's very important that whether we like it or not, we have to think collectively, positively, in the direction of how we can all move towards development. So there's also the issue of weak system in poor countries. In many cases, there are no systems in place, no institutions. You have individuals who take advantage of everybody or the system. The one thing that rich countries have, developed countries have, if you like, is system. Even I'm not suggesting that there are no opportunistic advantage taken in rich countries. I'm not saying rich countries are just a modernist perspective. Can just be seen as a destination of development. That's not my point. In comparative terms, I'm just saying these so-called rich countries or developed countries have some element of systems some elements of systems that can show us that, okay, individuals, even corruption, even though you have corruption in developed countries or in advanced countries, talk about all these developed countries. And there are systems in places to prevent corruption from moving from corruption to impunity, like we have in poor countries, where people known to be extremely corrupt still flaunt their wealth in the face of the oppressed or the poor, and there are no system. They are bigger. Corrupt people in poor countries appear to be bigger than even the system, collectively speaking. So the system, there's a need to build strong systems and institutions in poor countries, and meritocracy should be allowed. And because of these weak systems that are already instituted, poor countries these are not very important, are not competitive enough to take advantage of global opportunities. Meanwhile, I quite recognize the impact of coronavirus or the war between Russia and Ukraine as major elements that must be considered in explaining contemporary development of poor countries. But even the coronavirus cannot be taken to be a sufficient factor or explanation, or the Russo-Ukrainian war or the Russia-Ukraine war cannot be taken to be sufficient factor. These poor countries have essentially been poor before coronavirus and Russia-Ukraine war. But even during coronavirus, after coronavirus, these poor countries have not shown sufficient resilience and signs of growth and development. So these two factors of coronavirus epidemic and also the Russian-Ukraine war cannot be seen to be reasons why we can account for this continuous underdevelopment, perpetual underdevelopment, aggravated poverty that we have in this poor country. So the poor countries are not competitive enough. And I don't want to believe that this poor competition can only be explained because of the hawkish approaches of developed countries in terms of taking global, or in terms of playing global politics or global economic games. So I think the weak system, the corruption, the impunity, and some other factors I've mentioned earlier, in the long run, not even in the short run, have affected the capacity of poor countries to take advantage of even global opportunities. Even now, there has been as much as the Russia-Ukraine war is a major factor. There are still countries taking advantage. Even Russia, that is fighting the war, is reaping heavily from some of the fallouts of the war. For example, the skyrocketing price of the crude, Russia is reaping from it. How come poor countries who are members of OPEC have not been able to take such advantages? In fact, in some countries, the prices of fuel, their lifestyles have actually nosedived. Even though they export oil, they are still not able to take advantage of the increase in oil prices. The Russia that is even fighting war is taking advantage of. So this is because of weak system, locally and externally, to take advantage of such global opportunity that we have a number of these. So their institutions, their systems are not competitive, and they have the issue of poor leadership, weak leadership. It's a simple case of sometimes the poorest or the lowest person leading the best in most of these African countries, because they vote based on nepotism, some tribalistic tendencies, ethnic considerations. Some of these subjective tendencies determine who emerge as leaders or rulers in those places. So you have incompetent leaders in places who are not able to even pilot the vehicle of the country towards sustainable development or even development in the short term. And that's why it was also surprising that most of the countries in poor countries did not do very well on the account of Millennium Development Goals. And the way, if we continue to travel this direction, we can be sure that most poor countries will never achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, because the early warning signs are there. Poor countries are not showing resilience, they are not showing seriousness, they're not showing capacity and competitiveness and commitment and deliberateness needed to drive growth and development towards Sustainable Development Goals. And this is very, very serious. So you also have the case of policy inconsistencies. The issue of poor countries, their underdevelopment experiences, are not essentially due to lack of policies or good policies. They have fantastic policies, but they do not have enough strong will, enough commitment, enough political will, enough strong leadership that like you have in developed countries or even China to drive such policies. So you have a lot of political instability going on to the extent that this, in the long or even in the short run, has affected policy consistencies needed to drive growth and development in consistent ways. So there's enormous policy inconsistencies, and you need policy consistencies to drive growth and development. So it's not a contradiction that you have policy inconsistencies and underdevelopment or poverty in poor countries, and this must be taken very seriously. And that's why you also find docile followership. Sometimes this docile followership is not because the followers want to be docile sometimes, but because a lot of them have also been bullied and some of them have been suppressed through the hegemonic oppressive state apparatuses that have been deployed by the selfish and wicked leaders. Sometimes you just go on the street to protest, which is a legitimate right. You see mobilization of the military, security agencies suppressing revolts or protest to show grievance against the hawkish leaders that they have in such poor countries. So over time, also aside the bullish approaches of the leaders of rulers of poor countries, many followers in poor countries are also complicit in the retrogressive tendencies of their countries. I mentioned the issue of mutual impoverishment, circular exploitation, nepotism, everybody exploiting everybody. So everybody in the short run is profiting from the underdevelopment, but in the long run, everybody going to suffer for it. So you have complicit followers, docile followers, and bullish leaders. So everybody is. So there is also the issue of poor infrastructure because of humongous level of corruption that we have, impunity that we have in poor countries. The sources that are meant for infrastructural development that will enable growth and development have collapsed over time. Many of them lack basic infrastructure like electricity needed to drive growth and development. Poor roads, rural roads are not motorable. And in the long run, that's why you have farmers. Many of these countries are agricultural. They are agrarian society, and they have not been able to transform to mechanized agriculture. They have not been able to transform from subsistence farming to agribusiness. And unfortunately, many of these countries at the same time have foreign tastes, consumerism, excessive consumerism, and they do not produce what they consume. Unlike as usually the case, or mostly the case in China. China had to practice autarkic economic system for many years to drive their production. What is driving China today is strong leadership also, and their productive capacity to produce everything that everybody consumes, even across the world. It doesn't matter where you are. You must have patronized Chinese product or Chinese company one way or the other. So, but poor countries, generally speaking, have not, because productive capacity is a major factor that has driven and continue to drive development trajectory of China. So production, not consumption, will drive growth and development. So if you're going to consume, you've got to produce. If you consume it without producing, development cannot be achieved, not even growth. So all these factors must be there. So there must be production plus corruption, production plus consumption minus corruption before you can have growth. That's why in some countries corruption is not acceptable and will be met with capital punishment. So corruption, but poor countries consume, they have foreign tastes, consume things that are made abroad, because also a measure of identity and arrival in those countries. So production is very important. They import everything and produce near nothing. Import everything and produce near nothing, and consume everything from abroad. So consumption and taste, culture of consumerism is a major issue that is also we can give as reason for continuous underdevelopment and poverty. Because when you consume other people's products and you do not produce, and you continue to build taste for the foreign lifestyle and foreign goods, poverty and underdevelopment, with what you're going to reap It's not rocket science. It's basic, is development 101. So it's not advanced development at all. Finally, I will mention too much religion, excessive religiosity. Poor countries pray too much. They pray more than they work. Poor countries, their citizens will not elect good leaders, yet they pray to have good leaders. How would that be? So there's too much affinity for religion. Whereas rich countries, developed countries, though they have religions, have moved from empty religion or excessive religiosity to rationality, to productive economy, to consciousness for growth and development. But poor countries serve and worship unknown gods. Rather than work, many will pray. Rather than vote for good leaders, they will pray to have good leaders. And that will not work. They have more religious centers than companies. They rather take their money to religious centers and donate than to use the money to build companies and factories. They rather donate to religious centers than pay salaries, than build infrastructures. What man can do or woman can do for him or herself, God will not do. So enough of excessive religiosity or religion. Enough of that. There's a need to shift to productive basis. And do what you can do. Use your competence, use your sense, use your intellect to build things that will drive growth and development, rather than relying on an unknown God, or giving all your productive capacity for religions, rather than taking what you're supposed to do seriously. Religion will not drive growth without work, without productive capacity. Even many of these religions don't preach production, don't preach objective growth and development, don't preach hard work, smart work, education. Rather, they preach miracle or believe in the supreme being at the expense of the need to build necessary competence, infrastructure, rationality, and work ethics that will drive growth and development. So the only way to have development is to turn all of these points I've given around and drive intentionally towards activities, institutions, consciousness, systems that will drive meritocracy and drive growth and development in the long run. This is in the short run and the long run. There's a need to take a different route for poor countries to exit. So I don't necessarily agree with blaming the West, colonialism, imperialism, globalization for continuous development of Africa. While I agree with the fact that this may be important factors, they are not sufficient factors. And the earlier we realize this, the better. And I do sincerely wish I've made your day. Subscribe to the channel for more important contents. Drop your comments, like, and share extensively. I will soon see you in another video that you will find very interesting. Until I see you next time, make sure you are intentional in contributing to the development of your country. See you next time.